This is not just the story of a security researcher who turned down $30,000 from the DJI bug bounty program. This is also the story of a software engineer on the other side of the world who was fined $30,000 and imprisoned for 6 months because of a common security mistake. This is a true tale of two cities, best of times, worst of times story. So let me just start by saying I like DJI products. I own a DJI product. This is filmed on a DJI product. But what led to this developer being locked up in jail is not okay, and no one should be okay with it. Okay, I had to land that thing before I crashed into one of my monitors. This story actually starts back in 2017. The security researcher at the center of this story actually worked for a company that sold a counter-drone technology, basically a technology that could deplane drones that were in the sky. There was also a larger drone hacking community that wanted to do things like unlock the geofencing that prevented you from flying a DJI drone in a restricted area. You see, even now, if I pull up the DJI map, there are certain areas DJI drones just won't let you fly, like airports. It's understandable why DJI wouldn't want their products to fly in these areas. For one, it's illegal, but on top of that, it would just be really bad PR if something happened and their drone was at the center of it. So while you have, on the one side, a drone hacking community that's intent on unlocking these drones to allow you to fly wherever with them, you also have a company that put certain security controls in place to prevent you from being able to do those things. Now, after this drone hacking community did a little bit of public humiliation, eventually DJI publicly announced they'd be rolling out a bug bounty program, a legitimate means to disclose security vulnerabilities, a subset of which might allow you to fly a drone where you shouldn't be able to fly a drone. Now, the researcher at the center of the story, who I'll refer to as KF, came out and made public statements saying that they would never be able to match his salary, and a small drop in the bucket compared to the overall ocean of the drone hacking community and the capabilities that the drone hacking community has to be able to unlock these drones. KF has publicly come out and said many of these capabilities stemmed from code repositories that DJI employees published to public GitHub. Many of these repositories contain sensitive keys and credentials. KF actually successfully pushed back against DMCA complaints to take down his forks of these repositories. His argument was that because DJI published these repositories, they consented to the terms of service, which allows any user to fork their code and keep a copy of their fork. So interestingly enough, many of these repositories are still available today, and we can run TruffleHog on them to find the same keys that kicked off all the controversy back in 2017. One notable key was an SSL key and certificate that allowed anyone to monster in the middle traffic to DJI.com or any of its subdomains. The certificate was revoked September 4th in 2017, but the revocation process is notoriously bad at preventing certain devices from trusting these certificates. So it's entirely possible that for another 9 months, people could have abused these SSL certificates even though they were revoked in September. But the key that may have caused the most trouble for DJI was an AES key that was committed to a code repository that allowed the drone hacking community to unlock drones and fly them in restricted areas. DJI's intent for their bug bounty program was to control the narrative and blast radius for keys like this that were leaked out onto the internet. So when KF started asking about the bounty program, a researcher who had historically talked publicly about DJI exploits and increased the blast radius of security exploits related to DJI asked for some assurances that he wouldn't do the same this time around. This eventually took the form of them requesting that he sign an actual NDA agreement, legally preventing him from publicly talking about the bugs that he disclosed to the bounty program. NDAs and bug bounty programs are rare and usually not liked by security researchers, but they're not totally unheard of. The NDA included language that specified any bugs that he found in the future he would have to disclose to DJI. This contradicted his employment with a company developing anti-drone technology, and so he couldn't sign the NDA as it was originally worded. After a failed attempt to redline the NDA, he ended up giving up the $30,000 bounty that was offered to him through the program, and he ended up publicly disclosing the entire exchange via Twitter. But this is really only half the story. There will always be security researchers on Twitter unhappy with bug bounty programs. The part that makes this story really unique was on the other side of the world. DJI was working hard with the Chinese government to prosecute a developer named Lee. Lee was responsible for leaking a subset of the code repositories that KF had found. It's worth noting that code is very leaky. Most companies end up leaking out their source code through one mechanism or another. never intentionally, but if we were to put a developer in jail every time source code got leaked out, we would very soon run out of developers. KF pointed out that this was a systemic issue, and also pointed to other cases that other DJI employees had accidentally made their code repositories public. But this didn't seem to matter. The Chinese government moved forward with prosecuting Li. Li sent a number of emails to KF during this time period explaining that he grew up poor and that he was proud to go to university and finally get a real paying job. But in his words, this whole ordeal put a stain on his life when he got prosecuted, fined, and jailed. At one point, the developer was saying he was thinking about suicide. It's worth noting that some of his online accounts show recent activity, so I don't believe that Li took his own life. Let's take a look at one of the repositories that Li put online. In almost all of these repositories, we see 2 code commits, both from Li. But there's enough code here that suggests that this code probably wasn't written in 2 commits by one person. So to me, this suggests that the true history for this source code wasn't captured in Git. In fact, here we can actually see there's an SVN directory. SVN is a different technology than Git for tracking code changes. So how did this code end up on GitHub? Well, it's possible that Li wanted to better leverage Git for code sharing and take advantage of some of the newer technologies that are built around Git, like GitHub, that wasn't afforded to him through SVN technologies. It's possible he even learned this practice from other developers who were also sharing code on GitHub at the time. But whatever the reason, I don't believe this was done maliciously. There was no attempt to cover up his email address in the commit logs, and it was posted on his GitHub profile. He also came right out and admitted that it was his code and worked quickly to remove it. Although KF was able to bring it back, he cooperated with the Chinese authorities and with DJI to the best of his abilities. Most companies run what's called a blameless security culture, basically a culture of learning from one's mistake through blameless retrospectives. Blaming individuals for security vulnerabilities is often seen as building a culture of fear and hostility. It can push developers to hide or underplay security vulnerabilities, which can often just make the situation worse. It makes me very sad to see this developer was fined $30,000, the exact same amount that KF was offered for finding the vulnerabilities. And it makes me even sadder to see that he was jailed for 6 months. I hope that Li is doing okay now, and I hope that DJI doesn't run their bug bounty program like this anymore. As for KF, he's still tweeting, but he says he's retired from the drone hacking community.